Today on Uncommon Knowledge, Japan, land of the rising or the setting sun.
Funding for this program is provided by the John M. OLIN Foundation.
Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Our show today, the new nationalism in Japan. From the 1950s to the 1980s, Japan experienced rapid economic growth. Then, around 1990, the Japanese economy collapsed. For almost 15 years now, 15 years, this rich, educated country has experienced continuing economic stagnation. At the same time, Japan's traditional rival, China, has experienced economic growth, becoming what Japan once was, the dominant presence in Asia. In response to these events, a new strain of thinking about economics and foreign policy is emerging in Japan. The nationalists want to see Japan reinvigorate itself economically and assert itself throughout Asia. What are the risks and benefits to the United States if the nationalist program should succeed? Joining us today, two guests. Stephen Vogel is a professor of political science at the University of California at Berkeley. Toshio Nishi is a journalist in Japan and a fellow at the Hoover Institution. Eugene Matthews, writing in Foreign Affairs magazine, quote, "Japan's younger citizens grew up expecting their homeland to take the lead in Asia. But over the last 12 years, they have watched with dismay as their economy has languished in an extended recession and the country's influence has waned. China has slowly but surely assumed leadership of the region," close quote. Here's the first question. Can Japan ever regain the dynamism and influence it enjoyed for most of the second half of the 20th century, or has it permanently slipped into second place behind China? Stephen?
I think Japan will return to influence and dynamism, but over the long term, China is going to be the major power in Asia.
Toshio?
Japan rises again.
Japan rises again. All right. A little bit of recent history. Between 1989 and 1992, Japanese stocks lost 70% of their value, and after a period of dramatic growth, all the way from the 50s through the 1980s, a period during which there's only one brief recession. Ever since 1990, the Japanese economy has remained stagnant. You have here a rich, well-educated country that has remained stagnant for almost 15 years now. Why? What's going on?
It really is a matter of some very crucial policy mistakes that were made. Mostly macroeconomic policy, fiscal policy and monetary policy, and letting that bubble happen in the first place. Also, after the bubble burst, and not restarting the economy soon enough and effectively enough, and also allowing the banking crisis just to linger. So I don't think that the Japanese system itself has really fallen, but the policymakers have failed Japan.
Stephen's just told us it's been one policy mistake after another. Where is the Japanese politician who can set things right?
Economic issue right now in Japan is no longer economic nature. It's a political issue, it's social issue, more deeply, it's our psychic issue. It's our matter of pride as a nation. I have watched last 15 years this political shenanigan one after another. I really want to give a punch right to their nose. I want to see them bleed. No, bleeding is us. I mean, economy. No, I don't want to hear about any more economy. It's not going anywhere. We are getting poorer every year. United States say use $10 for food. In Japan, we use $25. 2.5 times more on food in Japan. And dollar is getting stronger, more imports coming cheap, but the price stays same. It's not the economic issue. It's a political issue. No leadership, none. And the same government last 50 years, they don't want to change.
How come?
Well, Prime
I mean,
Minister...
I return to this period of time. It's been almost 15 years. That's a long time for a political system which I think you would consider basically successful.
Right.
But at some point, if they don't provide solutions to these problems,
well,
something's
Prime Minister
wrong.
Koizumi squandered an incredible opportunity because he came to power with a mandate for reform, with huge popularity ratings. And so that he really had a lot of leverage as he came to power to put in a new reform program. And he's a political genius because what he did is he did that by attacking his own party. He said, I'm not the old LDP. We're going to have a new politics. I'm going to attack the heart of my own party. So far, so good. The problem was that he's not an economic genius, that his priorities were wrong, that he focused, in a sense, on his political vision of trying to attack his own party, trying to attack public works, trying to attack public works spending, when what he really needed to do was attack deflation and take care of the banking crisis. And he's been very slow on those things. Those just haven't been his priorities. And the government is finally making some progress in those areas, but it's partial and it's come a lot later than it should have.
Okay, so this long period of stagnation brings us to the rise of the new Japanese nationalists. Once again, let me quote Eugene Matthews in Foreign Affairs. The nationalists, quote, desire to see Japan assume a preeminent global role, close quote. Now, he argues that the nationalists, of course, have an agenda for the Japanese military and for Japanese diplomacy, and we'll come to those in a moment. But they also have an agenda for the Japanese economy. Let me quote him again. The nationalists may turn out to be the one factor that manages to unite Japan's public behind the major structural changes the country must adopt to revive its economy, close quote. The nationalists want adoption of Western accounting standards, and end to government-supported monopolies, promotion on the basis of merit rather than seniority, and an end to the stigma on entrepreneurship. Anything wrong with any of that?
Yes.
Okay.
Those aren't the nationalists as I understand it. I mean, Matthews is talking about this huge array of nationalists, but there's lots of different nationalists. There's a larger group, I think, of anti-American globalist nationalists. I mean, he's talking about the minority.
Those sound like classically.
Right.
Milton Friedman would be happy with that.
Absolutely.
Program.
You've got a vocal minority who's saying exactly what you're talking about. But those aren't the real nationalists. The real nationalists are ones that resent hearing for these 12, 15 years you've been talking about the United States tell them how they should change, resenting American leadership and saying we shouldn't be following in the American lead. We need a new and a different Japanese way.
You call yourself a nationalist.
I am.
What kind are you?
I want to get out from the huge umbrella of our best friend across the Pacific.
The United States.
Yeah. My kind of nationalist in Japan, maybe not many, but very vocal. We like United States, but liking United States does not mean we should be slave to it.
Do you have a domestic agenda for Japan? Do you have an economic agenda?
Yeah, no. Economy to me is secondary. Look, my generation went through the defeat,
right?
Occupation, no food. I mean, we have never been this wealthy. Never. In my entire Japanese history. We are never this rich.
So, in other words, taking the long view of Japanese history, this current stagnation isn't all that bad.
No big deal.
It's still a rich country.
We are rich.
All right. Does this sound like a more typical nationalist to you?
No, no.
That is?
All so, right. Now, problem
and maybe not so new either.
Not new. So, problem here is, look, we need some pride here. We have exemplification, global exemplification, how much Japan spends on eliminating poverty and disease, etc. For instance, United Nations, $5 billion annual budget. Japan pays 20% of it. United States 22%. United States alone pays 42% of UN budget. There is other 189 members. What are they doing? And talking big.
And so Japan puts up 20% of the UN's budget, and what does Japan get for it?
Nothing.
Any respect?
No.
All right.
Next, the prospects for Japanese remilitarization.
1994, evidence first emerges that North Korea has a nuclear program. There's a tense moment, we now all know, when Clinton actually asked the Pentagon to draw up war plans. So for a few weeks in 1994, the prospect of war on the Korean Peninsula is tangible. 1998, North Korea tests a ballistic missile which flies over Japanese territory before splashing into the Pacific. 2002, North Korea admits that it's continuing a covert nuclear program. I quote again Bill Emmett, who's the editor of The Economist, although here he's writing in a different magazine, quote, "These developments have hardened Japanese public opinion. There is now a desire to see the government take a tougher line with North Korea, and this had made it possible for politicians to openly contemplate preemptive strikes and nuclear deterrence." On the one hand, Article 9 of the American drafted Japanese Constitution, which commits the country effectively to pacifism. On the other hand, talk of preemptive strikes and nuclear deterrence. Could you explain current Japan, please?
I don't think there's support for nuclear deterrence or for preemptive strikes. What you have is a new realism in Japanese public opinion. That means in the sense of an acceptance, the self-defense forces exist, that it may not be such a bad thing that they exist, that Japan has some right to participate in some form of national defense and possibly collective defense. That's about where we are today. But I think the pacifism still runs very strong, and I don't think that there's any support for becoming more militaristic, for a nuclear option, and there's actually quite a lot of resistance even to a revision of Article 9.
Well put. That's exactly. 1998, August 31st, 12:05, actually, missile flew over. I just finished my manuscript. Done. Watch the TV, missiles going over. Japan dramatically changed when we discovered and Kim acknowledged, yes, we kidnapped your daughters.
The kidnapping of Japanese citizens.
I can't believe there was more dramatic, psychological, emotional trauma and shift from the super pacifist to the ambiguous pacifist.
That's where it is right now.
That's
ambiguous
right.
pacifist.
Right. So the Japanese people are really strongly behind a hard line on this issue of the kidnappings. They want Tokyo to take a hard line with the North Koreans about getting full information about those kidnappings. That doesn't mean that there's support for a major military buildup.
Ichiro Ozawa, head of Japan's opposition Liberal Party, asserted not long ago that no matter how much China or North Korea chooses to expand its military, Japan would be able to keep pace. I'm quoting him. Obviously, this is a translation into English, but it's the closest quotation I can find. 3,000 to 4,000 nuclear warheads. If we get serious, we will never be beaten in terms of military power. Close quote. There you have a senior Japanese political figure talking about 3,000 or 4,000 nuclear warheads. Is he joking? Is he being... what's going on there?
Well, it used to be a taboo. You could not even talk about nuclear armament. I think what has changed is that you can, in normal discourse, you can bring up this issue, you can bring up this possibility. Is it going to happen? No. Is there strong support for it? No.
No, I think that's too much.
You'd agree with that?
Well, but then usually history changes by accidents. If North Korea make an accident of shooting something and landing Osaka or Tokyo, I think Japan would immediately change Article 9, rewrite the constitution, and there's enough technological know-how to build the best airplane, fighter planes, submarines, aircraft carrier.
Let me ask our guests whether the United States should favor or oppose Japanese remilitarization.
Again, I'm going to quote Eugene Matthews. It is hard to overstate the effect Japan's militarization could have on U.S. interests in Asia, and nowhere would the impact be greater than in China. If the United States is seen as encouraging Japanese militarization, rising tensions could pit Washington against Beijing. That's a sensible statement, right? Okay, let me run down a list of possibilities here. The Japanese have already committed a couple of $1 billion to putting up 2 satellites of their own. We're happy with that. The United States is happy with that. Should we encourage them to put up more satellites?
I don't think the United States should be encouraging Japan to increase its military power at all, no.
Not at all. Self-defense forces, they spend just a little over 1% of GDP on the self-defense forces. It's been 60 years since they saw any action. They're sending a contingent to Iraq now. This is the first a time in 60 years when Japanese troops are being put in a theater where they might actually see action. And the question now is whether Japan should actually turn its self-defense forces into an army worthy of the name. You favor that?
Well,
and
Steve,
what should the United States favor?
Yeah, Steve just said earlier, very strong pacifism in Japan.
Right.
As long as there's no accident, nobody's threatening us actually.
Right.
We will not change the Article 9. Those 100 and 500 soldiers going to Iraq.
Right.
This is a serious issue, not because we are supporting America, but we are going over the Article 9. Article 9 is interpreted many times to suit a political expediency. If we start doing this, there will be soon there's no constitutional
Impediment, right?
restraint over it. So constitution becomes irrelevant.
Shinichi Kitaoka,
Yes.
law professor at the University of Tokyo, quote, remilitarization is going on, but no one is willing to take on the task of changing the legal framework.
Yes, that's
That's
correct.
an accurate statement? Or is this an overstatement?
No, that's true.
I think so too.
And so, and what's your position as a Japanese nationalist?
We,
You're happy to
we
see it.
have to stop talking. We have to have national dialogue over our constitution. It's 60 years and no amendment ever. Time changes, constitution doesn't change. It's crazy.
There actually is a constitutional commission that has been looking at this, both at the level of the Diet and the Liberal Democratic Party, the ruling party, has its own commission. So this is on the table. It's not on the table in the short run. It's going to be a 2 to 3 year process at the minimum. And then to change the Constitution, you would need a national referendum to pass. So it's not an easy process, but I think that this is something that on the longer horizon is going to be on the table.
Biggest question, I suppose. Listen to two quotations. Again, I think for the last time here, Eugene Matthews, quote, a nuclear Japan would make Asia a more dangerous place, starting an arms race unlike any the region has ever seen. China would increase its nuclear stockpile and seek more nuclear submarines. Washington must persuade Tokyo not to acquire nuclear weapons, close quote. Charles Krauthammer. We should go to the Chinese and tell them plainly that if they do not join us in squeezing North Korea and thus stopping its march to go nuclear, we will endorse any Japanese attempt to create a nuclear deterrent of its own. If our nightmare is a nuclear North Korea, China's is a nuclear Japan. It's time to share the nightmares, close quote. American policy as regards the Japanese nuclear deterrent should be?
Oh, should be definitely do not encourage the Japanese to go nuclear.
Krauthammer,
Japan
that's
has-
just crazy.
Absolutely, that's crazy. Japan has nothing to benefit, I think, from even increasing its military power beyond its current levels, much less to have any kind of nuclear parent. Japan has nothing to gain. The world has nothing to gain from that. We would be very foolish to push them in that direction.
Okay, but Stephen,
I can't seem to get either of our guests to make a strong argument for anything other than the status quo. Let me try one more time.
you've described the current political structure as by and large successful. Koizumi is slowly coming to grips with the economic problem. As regards asserting its prestige in the, or its influence in Asia, as regards expanding its military, even in very minor ways, you're extremely skeptical about all that. So what
Correct.
you're describing is a program for maintaining the status quo, which, however, will not satisfy Toshio's psychic need.
Well, if you want Japan to move in a nationalist direction, there's multiple different directions it could go.
All right.
I think the direction that Japan should go is towards a less militarist nationalist direction. In other words, it should move its foreign policy away from the United States, become more independent. To do so, I think it should revise Article 9, but not get rid of it, reinstate an Article 9 that works, one that says that Japan will still maintain a primarily defensive military, that it will never have nuclear weapons, that it will never unilaterally strike. In other words, a military that would be very closely intertwined in the framework of collective security, and if anything, actually decrease its military power, not increase it. So you can be a nationalist who wants a much stronger Japan, or you can be a nationalist that wants a much more independent Japan. And I think for Japan, the latter is the better option.
And what about, go ahead.
The reason I'm using a psychic word, there's a psychic void here. Japan, the land of this great martial arts. And just because we lost one war, we have to be a Newark. The quote you just said, it's like Japan is American's pawn against China.
Right.
Excuse me. Hey, we are great economic power, great brain there, 100% literacy, everybody's polite, and enormous this emotional touch to
You're
the,
angrier with the United States than you.
No,
You
I'm
resent the
not.
American presence more than
No.
the Chinese.
No,
No?
China is far scary. I'm telling you, we like Americans. We like to be the closest with the United States. But if U.S. uses us as a whipping boy or pawns or some kind of card, I'm sure my generation and those younger who do not have any guilt complex over the war says, what? Would you like to repatriate those dollars from Wall Street?
Governor Ishihara, who is one of the kind of the dawn
Governor
of the
of
nationalists,
Tokyo.
yes,
Yeah.
governor of Tokyo, put this, I think, he's a former novelist, so he put this very nicely. He said, I'm not angry at the United States. Japan is like a small child that's hiding under the skirt of its mother. That's the United States. And I'm not mad at the mother, I'm mad at the child.
Okay, look.
Last question. What practical steps should Japan be taking to create a proper geopolitical role for itself?
Let me ask you both, what advice you would give to the Prime Minister of Japan if you could narrow it down to an agenda of one or two items, what must be done in Japan?
First, national debate over the Constitution. That would open up so many pent-up emotions, frustration, and aspirations. We can talk about the military build-up. If I say we have to defend ourselves, not by the U.S. Marines who spend $5 billion, which we pay. Why do we have to hire bodyguards? We can defend ourselves.
So what you're talking about really is some sort of psychological reckoning,
Yes.
long delayed in the wake of the Second World War. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, so I would do three things.
Okay.
First, I would change the Constitution as we suggest, not getting rid of Article 9, but making an Article 9 that works, that people will pay attention
Can I
to.
just,
Yes.
you want the change in the Constitution itself.
Yes.
What Toshio wants is the debate.
Yeah, I think you need
Yeah,
both.
he values the debate.
This is what
All
we're
right,
talking
all right,
about.
fine.
Then secondly, I think Japanese foreign policy has to shift away from a total reliance on the United States. When the United States is headed in the right direction, I think Japan should be a strong partner. When it's not, it should feel like it can say no, and it should do that.
Where should it say no to the United States?
Well, I would say certainly on the latest engagements in Iraq. Japan had an
Public opinion was
opportunity.
against it?
Japanese public opinion was against it. I think that Japan has a very strong commitment to the United Nations. It should have said that we are only going to participate in something that has been completely sanctioned by the United Nations. We're not with you on this one.
Japan should have thrown in its lot with France and Germany?
I would say so, yes.
But we are too close to the United States, and we don't have foreign policy. Please, we are errand boy for American master.
Okay.
We don't have such a wonderful sound foreign policy.
But it doesn't exist.
No.
All right, what's your third point now?
Third point would be to deal with the issue of the history in Asia, because this still constrains Japan's relations, its wartime history, wartime aggression. It still constrains its relationship with China, with South Korea, and its ability to play a leadership role in Asia. And I will
Deal
admit,
with it means what?
Deal with it means a clear apology, not just from the Prime Minister, but ideally from the Diet, a much more open information program to try and make a clear accounting of that history. The Japanese government has certainly made considerable efforts, but it hasn't been enough in the eyes of the Chinese and the South Koreans, and that hurts Japan.
Now I'm glad. First point of complete disagreement with Steve. I'm sick and tired of apologizing. whole Asia says apologize, apologize. And we keep, somehow I grew up in Japan, so we apologizing, oh, we are bad boys. And we became rich to share our prosperity. Last 10 years, we give $150 billion of foreign aid. That's not enough. And soon, I mean, my generation now reaching to the leadership level, and constant, it's like you've been told, apologize for the slavery. How long will this go on? If China doesn't forgive us, Korea doesn't forgive, so be it. I don't need your forgiveness. Don't ask for our money.
Last question. It's television, so we have to bring it to the last question. Now give me your 1 or 2 lines of advice for the President of the United States. Toshio?
Keep Japan close, but don't take it for granted.
Stephen?
Yeah, I think that's right. You have to communicate. If you want Japan to be a partner, you've got to bring them in. You've got to tell them what your foreign policy agenda is. Otherwise, I would stay away. Don't press Japan on what it should be doing in terms of its economic policy.
All right. Toshio Nishi, Stephen Vogel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
I'm Peter Robinson for Uncommon Knowledge. Thanks for joining us.
Funding for this program was provided by the John M. Olin Foundation.
We are PBS.